coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens.
Well, Pachuco was something, with these Mexican Americans that like to be a little rebellious. They wore the Zoot Suit, which was frowned upon because of, war rationing. They wore more fabric than they needed.
El Paso is where it was formulated into an example of a label for Mexicans who dressed differently, who spoke differently.
Pachuco actually comes from El Paso because the Mexicans were coming through El Paso more than any place. El Paso was the big opening. So the Zoot Suiters were an interesting combination of street, urban, Mexican slang and talk. It was really the caló. They talked that different Spanish. The slang was very elaborate. They took a lot of the boogie-woogie music thing, but they Mexicanized it, and I think that's an important part of it.
What Pachucos came to represent was anti-American. In a time, in a wartime climate, where anything that was perceived as outside of the parameters of what was considered to be American was looked down upon and incriminated.
I think with the Zoot Suit, obviously when you sort of think about what did the Zoot Suit mean to sort of that Mexican-American generation, because, wearing the Zoot, represented pride, right, sort of respect.
They all came about through being up against a wall. Whatever oppression was going on, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna be like the norm. I'm gonna stand on my own and do my own thing.
For the women, I believe there was even more rebelliousness or more anti-traditional.
The people who originally came here from Mexico, they were fighting for freedom, fighting for progress, and fighting for success on some level. And then, generations go by, and you have these younger generations of kids who are more modern thinking, and they're like, you know what, Charlie Holmes, like, I'm not gonna tone this down. Matter of fact, I'm gonna turn it way up.
There were plenty Mexican-American Chicanos that were represented in World War II as soldiers. My great uncle was one of them. He's in his 90s now. And he still is very patriotic, and a lot of the youth were, but there was definitely some in the barrios that did not want to go and fight. It's like other wars, that we can think of.
There was a lot of them that either joined or got drafted. Mexican population was pretty much decimated by the war. People were fighting. The ones that stayed were generally the women, like the other communities that worked in the industry to help the war effort. LA became the largest manufacturing center of the country during World War II because of the ships. The shipyards was close to the harbor. It had a lot of defense industries. Defense industry is big in California, and LA was the heart of it.
The interesting thing is that while the Chicanos were fighting the sailors here in Los Angeles, their brothers were fighting a war for democracy somewhere else, supposedly. So, there's a big contradiction there.
It's the biggest contradiction of World War II. While we are fighting oppression abroad, we are oppressing people domestically.
During World War II, right, I think it's, again, it kind of reveals like we're all fighting, we're all the good guys, we're spreading democracy in Europe, but the reality is that we're still treated as less than here in the United States.
On the night that Jose Diaz was killed, there was a birthday celebration happening at a ranch in rural Los Angeles County. And they had a reservoir. They had a couple reservoirs, but the largest one, local kids would use as a swimming pool because, again, because of segregation, you couldn't go down to the local swimming pool and swim.
There was a party that night, a birthday party. Some uninvited guests came.
There was a group of Russian immigrant kids from Downey that crashed the party, the birthday party. They want beer, they want to join the party. They get thrown out.
They're driving down the road to get out of Williams Ranch, and they happen to pass by Sleepy Lagoon, where there's a couple couples from 38th Street that are there.
Words are exchanged, and a fight breaks out between the Downey boys and the young men and women who are parked around the reservoir.
The 38th Streeters go back to their neighborhood, come back in a few carloads, and no one's at the Sleepy Lagoon anymore. It's quiet.
Downey boys are now long gone, but they're looking for them. And somebody says, well, maybe they're still at the party up the road. And so that's when 38th Street kids then go up to the party. And a fight broke out. And then the 38th Street kids left immediately. Someone said, the cops are coming, and they all hopped in their car and they took off. So the party goers at the ranch hands, they're picking up after the fight. They're trying to see who's hurt. This is when they find the body of Jose Diaz. So they had dragnets all throughout LA County, and they just ran kids through, fingerprinted them, took their pictures, things like that. And eventually, they land on the 38th Street kids who happen to be at the place near the time that Jose Diaz was killed.
The Zoot Suit Riots happened about a year later around different parts of LA, and it spread to different parts of the country, in fact.
Pachucos were rounded up, beaten down, had their clothes cut off of them, their hair cut, publicly humiliated, and then arrested.
There's no weapon produced ever. There's no eyewitness produced ever. There's no confession that was ever produced.
And a lot of it had to do with the media saying that these Mexican gangs were terrorizing neighborhoods. They were robbers, they were rapists, they were murderers.
Criminals, they're thieves, they're immoral.
And again, I remind you that studies have looked at arrest rates and all these kinds of things, and there is no demonstrable evidence that juvenile delinquency was actually a problem, but people were worried about it.
Here you had kids, young people, that were freely engaging and enjoying their First Amendment right to freedom of expression. And they were beaten for it because they were perceived as an anti-American threat.
The Zoot Suiters might have had a more communal understanding of the representation of their neighborhood. But when that evolved from Pachuco to Cholo, that all changed. And that became, that's when the gang culture really spawned, and it took on a whole new meaning. So if you put your neighborhood on you were gonna either live, die, or kill for that tattoo.
It was Pachuco, but then it became eventually Cholo. It became a whole different way of doing things that nobody had done before.